My name is Margaret Bentley. I'm 68 years old, and my son, Nick Bentley, had my chair removed from his own dining room table before I even sat down for Thanksgiving. I didn't raise a man who does that. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to see it. I stood in the doorway of his house on Beacon Street, a casserole dish burning through the oven mitts in my hands, and I watched his wife, Yasmin Bentley, slide a folding chair in from the garage. Not a real chair, a folding chair. At the end of the table, away from the good china, away from the grandkids. "We ran out of room, Margaret," Yasmin said. Not Mom, Margaret. Nick didn't even look up from carving the turkey. That was the moment I knew, not suspected, knew. My own son had decided at some point before I arrived that his mother was the one person at that table who could be an afterthought. 3 years ago, I sold the house I raised him in, the house his father and I paid off dollar by dollar so Nick could make the down payment on this one. Nobody talks about that. There's no plaque for it, just a folding chair. I sat in it anyway. I ate off a paper plate because we're short on the good plates too. My grandson, Zachary Bentley, 7 years old, kept trying to hand me his roll across the table because he saw my plate was smaller than everyone else's. His mother told him to stop fussing. I smiled through all of it, 38 years of practice smiling through things. Then dessert came out, and Nick stood up to make a toast. He thanked Yasmin's parents for always being there. He thanked his business partner. He thanked his college roommate for believing in him before anyone did. He did not say my name. I sat in that folding chair with a fork in my hand, and I understood something I'd been refusing to understand for 2 years. I wasn't losing my son slowly. He'd already left. I was just the last one to get the memo. I didn't cry at that table. I want to be clear about that. I waited until I got to my car in his driveway, and then I sat there in the cold for 20 minutes with the engine off because I didn't trust my hands on the wheel yet. What Nick didn't know, what none of the Bentleys knew, was that 2 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from a lawyer about my late husband's pension fund, a fund Nick thought had been drained years ago, a fund he had no idea was still sitting there, untouched, with my name on every line of it. He was about to find out exactly what it costs to give your mother a folding chair. If you've ever been the one who gave everything and got treated like an afterthought, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below. I read every single one. 2 months after that Thanksgiving, I told my son Nick I was going to visit my sister in Erie for a while. That wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was I'd already met with the lawyer, a sharp, quiet woman named Rosa Quinn who'd been handling my late husband's Delbert's affairs since the accident. Delbert Bentley worked 31 years at the steel plant. When he died, there was a pension, a life insurance payout, and a smaller retirement account he'd opened without telling anyone, back when Nick was still in high school, back when Delbert used to say, just in case that boy needs saving from himself one day. Nick had always believed that account was gone, drained, he said once at a family dinner, drained years ago paying off his father's medical bills. That's what he told his wife Yasmin. That's what he told his brother-in-law. That's what he told everyone, including me, to my face, at my own kitchen table, like I wouldn't remember my own husband's handwriting on the paperwork. It wasn't drained. It had been sitting untouched for 6 years, quietly earning interest, because Rosa Quinn's firm had flagged an old power of attorney dispute that froze it right after Delbert passed. Nick assumed it vanished. He never checked. He never even asked me. I sat in Rosa's office in Erie with the folder open in front of me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than sadness. I felt clarity. "You understand," Rosa said, sliding her glasses up, "that as the sole surviving spouse and named beneficiary, this is entirely yours. No one else's name is on this, not your son's, not anyone's." "He's been telling people it doesn't exist," I said. Rosa didn't blink. then I'd imagine he has a reason to want it to stay that way. I didn't understand what she meant by that until 3 days later when my niece, Susie Douglas, called me, voice tight and careful, and said, "Aunt Margaret, I don't know if I should tell you this, but Nick's been telling people at church that you're not all there anymore, that you've been forgetting things, that the family's worried about you managing your own finances." I sat down slowly on my sister's back porch, phone pressed hard to my ear. "He said what?" "He said it real casual, Aunt Margaret, like it was just concern. But Juan Hoffman from your old church, he mentioned it to my husband like it was already common knowledge, like everyone already knew you were slipping." I wasn't slipping. I balanced my own checkbook every week. I still drove myself to church, to the pharmacy, to my sister's house 4 hours away without missing a single exit. I had never in my life forgotten a name, a date, or a debt owed to me. But I understood, sitting there with the phone shaking slightly in my hand, exactly what my son was building, not out of confusion, out of preparation. A narrative, a quiet, respectable, deeply believable narrative that Margaret Bentley was starting to lose her grip, just in case one day a lawyer or a judge or a family member ever needed a reason why an elderly woman's assets should be moved into someone else's more capable hands. He wasn't just trying to hide the pension fund from me, he was laying the groundwork to take it. I looked down at the folder Rosa had given me, at my husband's careful handwriting from decades ago, at the words, "just in case that boy needs saving from himself one day." And for the first time since that folding chair, I didn't feel like crying. I felt like I finally understood what I was up against. That night, I called Rosa Quinn back. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to find out exactly what my son has been telling people, all of it, in writing if you can get it." There was a pause on the line, and then Rosa said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Bentley, I think you should also know, I pulled the guardianship filings for our county this afternoon, just as a precaution. Your son filed a petition 6 days ago." A guardianship petition. 6 days before my niece even called me. My own son had already walked into a courthouse and asked a judge to declare me unfit to manage my own life. I didn't sleep that night in Erie. By morning, I'd packed a bag and asked my sister to drive me to Columbus because that's where the petition had been filed, not in Pittsburgh where I lived, where anyone who actually knew me could vouch for me, but in Columbus, where Nick's father-in-law, a retired judge named Alan Osborne, still had friends on the bench. That detail alone told me everything. Nick hadn't done this carelessly. He'd done it strategically, with help, in a county where the deck was already stacked in his favor before I even knew there was a game being played. Rosa Quinn met me at a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. She'd already pulled the petition. She slid it across the table without a word, and I read my son's signature under a paragraph that described me, his own mother, as someone showing significant cognitive decline, including memory lapses, confusion about financial matters, and an inability to manage my own affairs safely. Attached was a supporting statement from Yasmin, from Zachary's pediatrician somehow, though I'd never once discussed my mental state with that man, and one more name that stopped my heart cold, Jesse Bentley, my other son, my eldest, Nick's brother. Jesse, who I hadn't heard from in 8 months. Jesse, who I'd bailed out of 2 failed business ventures and never once asked for a dollar back. Jesse had signed a sworn statement agreeing with his brother, word for word practically, like they'd sat down together and written it as a team. I set the papers down on the diner table very slowly because my hands wanted to shake, and I would not give this diner, this town, this moment the satisfaction of watching an old woman's hands shake. "They planned this together," I said. Rosa nodded. It looks that way. And Margaret, I have to be honest with you. Judge Osborne's connections here are real. If this goes in front of the wrong judge with the wrong paperwork, guardianship petitions like this get rubber stamped more often than people think, especially for women your age, especially when family members present a united front. So what do? You show up in person, sharp, put together, and prepared, and you bring your own paper trail, because right now the only story in that courtroom is theirs. That night in the motel outside Columbus, I couldn't stop thinking about a specific memory. Nick, 19 years old, calling me at 2 a.m. from a bar fight he didn't start. I drove 3 hours in the middle of the night, paid his bail with money I didn't have, and never told his father the full truth of what happened because I didn't want Delbert to lose faith in him. That's the son who wrote significant cognitive decline next to my name. I called my niece Susie Douglas the next morning, and she told me something that made the whole thing click into place cold and clear. Aunt Margaret, I found out why they're doing this now. It's not really about you at all. Nick and Jessie are in some kind of financial trouble together, a business loan, something with a shared LLC. I heard Yasmin mention it to my mom. They need capital fast, and they think if they can get guardianship over your accounts before the pension fund officially clears probate. She didn't have to finish the sentence. They didn't think I was losing my mind. They knew exactly how sharp I was. That was the whole problem. A confused old woman is easy to overrule quietly. A clear-headed one who knows her rights is a threat. I looked at myself in the motel bathroom mirror, same wrinkles, same tired eyes, same woman who'd been made to feel invisible at her own family's dinner table, and for the first time, I didn't see someone fading. I saw someone about to make herself very, very hard to ignore. The hearing was in 4 days. I wore my navy blue suit to that hearing, the one I bought for Delbert's funeral. I figured if I was going to bury something that day, it might as well be my son's version of me. Rosa Quinn sat beside me at that table, calm as still water, while across the room Nick Bentley sat next to his lawyer without once turning his head to look at me. Yasmin sat behind him, arms crossed, jaw tight. And 2 rows back, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, was Jessie, my eldest, the one who signed the statement calling his own mother incompetent. Judge wasn't Alan Osborne, thank God. Rosa had filed a motion the day before that got the case reassigned on procedural grounds, and I watched something flicker across Nick's face when the new judge, a woman named Vivian Morris, walked in instead. He hadn't planned for that. The petition was read aloud. Cognitive decline, confusion about finances, concerns for her safety living alone. I sat there and listened to a stranger read a description of a woman I did not recognize. Then Rosa stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply laid out, one document at a time, exactly what my last 18 months actually looked like. Bank statements I'd managed myself flawlessly down to the penny. A letter from my own doctor confirming no diagnosis, no complaints, no red flags of any kind. Church attendance records showing I'd never missed a Sunday, never gotten lost, never needed a ride I hadn't asked for on purpose. And then she introduced something Nick clearly didn't know we had. Text messages between Nick and Jessie, pulled from a shared family email thread Jessie had, months ago in better days, accidentally CC'd me on and never noticed. In it, Nick wrote, "If we frame it right, it doesn't matter if she's sharp. Judges don't dig deep on these unless someone fights back hard. She won't fight back. She never has." I watched my son's face when Rosa read that sentence aloud in open court. He never has. 38 years of smiling through folding chairs and forgotten birthdays and toasts that never said my name, and this is what it bought me. A son who built his entire plan on the assumption that his mother wouldn't fight back. Jessie wouldn't meet my eyes at all after that. His lawyer whispered something to him. I saw his hand shake around the edge of his folder. Judge Morris didn't take long. She dismissed the petition outright, called it, in her words, an attempt to weaponize the guardianship process for what appears to be undisclosed financial motives, not against me, against them. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I just felt tired, and something else underneath the tired that I hadn't expected. Grief, because winning didn't undo it. My son had stood in a courtroom and argued, formally, on the record, that I didn't deserve control over my own life. That happened now. I could win every hearing left in this world, and that would still be true. Outside on the courthouse steps, Nick caught up to me. First time he'd spoken directly to me in months. "Mom," he said, "it wasn't personal. It was never about you not being capable. We just needed—" "Don't," I said. Just that one word. I didn't raise my voice either. I'd learned that from Rosa watching her all week. You don't have to be loud to be finished. I turned and walked toward Rosa's car, and I heard Jesse call out behind me, voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Mom, wait, there's something else you need to know before you go home, about the house." I stopped walking. I did not turn around yet, because I already knew somewhere in my gut that whatever came out of his mouth next was going to be worse than a folding chair, worse than a guardianship petition, worse than anything they'd done so far. I turned around on those courthouse steps and looked at my eldest son for the first time in 8 months. "What about the house?" I said. Jesse's hands were shaking. "The house you sold 3 years ago, the one you gave Nick the down payment money from. Mom, it wasn't Nick's house you helped him buy. He never used that money for a down payment at all. He used it to cover a business debt that was already underwater. The house on Beacon Street, it's not even in his name. It's leveraged 3 times over. He's been one missed payment away from losing it for over a year." I stood very still. "The folding chair," I said slowly. "The Thanksgiving, the good china he said we were short on." "There's no good china, Mom," Jesse said, voice breaking. "There's barely a mortgage payment. He didn't want you to know how bad it got. And when the pension fund came up and he realized you had money that was actually yours, actually clean, actually enough to save him, he panicked. The guardianship wasn't just about control. It was the only way he could think of to get access to it before everything collapsed." I thought about my grandson Zachary passing me his dinner roll because my plate looked smaller than everyone else's. 7 years old, and he'd noticed something wrong at that table before any adult in that house had the decency to too. I didn't cry on those courthouse steps. I'd promised myself that much back in Erie. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked Jesse. "You signed that statement too." "Because I was scared of losing my own house if I didn't go along with him. And then I watched a judge read my own words back to me in a courtroom, calling my mother incompetent, and I realized I'd already lost something a lot more important than a house." I didn't forgive him right there. I want to be honest about that. Forgiveness isn't a courthouse steps kind of thing. It takes longer than that, and it takes more than an apology delivered because a plan fell apart. But I let him drive me back to Pittsburgh that afternoon, in silence mostly, and somewhere around the Ohio-Pennsylvania line, he said quietly, "What are you going to do now?" I looked out the window at the hills going by, gold and brown in the late fall light. "I'm going to keep the pension fund exactly where it is, untouched, just like your father wanted, and I'm going to find myself a small place just for me, no folding chairs required." I did exactly that. 2 months later, I moved into a small apartment on the north side of Pittsburgh, first floor, big windows, a kitchen table with 4 matching chairs, real ones, that nobody sits in unless I invite them. Nick lost the house on Beacon Street 4 months after that hearing. I heard about it from Susie, not from him. I sent one card, no money, just a card that said, "I hope you land on your feet. I mean that." I haven't heard back. Jesse calls me every Sunday now. Some weeks I answer right away. Some weeks I let it ring twice before I pick up, just because I can. Because for 38 years I answered before the first ring finished every single time, for everyone, and it never once occurred to anyone that I might not always be available. I still think about that folding chair sometimes, how small a thing it was, how much it told me if I'd been willing to listen sooner. I am 70 years old now. I have my own table, my own chairs, my own name on every account that matters. Nobody moved me into a smaller seat this year. Nobody ran out of room for me. I made sure of that myself.